We are grateful to have you with us for today's Fighting Hate from Home, where we will be discussing effective allyship and advocacy for the transgender community. Our discussion may include terminology that you are unfamiliar with, such as sex, gender, cisgender, and transgender, so a glossary is in the chat. This year, we have witnessed a record-breaking amount of legislation throughout the country targeting the transgender community and transgender youth in particular, with over 100 bills introduced, more than any other prior legislative session. 31 states have introduced bills that ban transgender athletes from participating in sports consistent with their gender identities. 8 states have already enacted these bills into law, with another state's governor implementing a ban through executive order. In addition, over 20 states have introduced bills that prohibit or limit transgender youth from accessing gender-affirming care, with 2 states already enacting such a bill into law. We did see a moment of hope earlier this week when Governor John Bel Edwards vetoed Louisiana's bill targeting transgender youth in sports. And we want to thank the governor and community advocates across the state for preventing this discriminatory bill from becoming law. This wave of bills is particularly dangerous because it takes aim at an especially vulnerable population, young trans people. The Trevor Project's 2020 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health found that 21% of transgender and non-binary youth have attempted suicide, and 52% have seriously considered it. Today's conversation will discuss why it's now more important than ever for us to show up and be strong allies for the transgender community, as their rights, as well as their personal safety, are constantly under attack. Our program includes a moderated panel with 3 transgender activists from the South, as this issue is particularly prevalent in this region, and a Q&A portion at the end. As a reminder, if you have questions for our guests throughout the program, please enter them in the chat. Before the panel, to get this conversation started, we are pleased to welcome Jen Slipakoff, the current co-chair of Human Rights Campaign's Atlanta Steering Committee and a member of HRC's National Board of Governors. Jen is an emeritus member of HRC's Parents for Transgender Equality and has previously served as the co-president for the PFLAG Metro Atlanta chapter. She has been advocating for the LGBTQ+ community since her young daughter transitioned 8 years ago. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. And thank you so much to the ADL for inviting me. It truly is an honor to be here. As Allison mentioned, my name's Jen Slipakoff. I am the former president of the PFLAG Metro Atlanta chapter, and I currently serve as co-chair for the Atlanta Steering Committee of the Human Rights Campaign. And I also happen to be a mom. I have 2 kiddos, a 17-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter who happens to be trans. I consider us incredibly lucky to have a child who let us know her authentic self so early in her life. I've been advocating for her for almost 9 years. She showed us who she was in really organic ways and gave us a lot of clues. And as I mentioned, I have an older son, so we had what most people would consider traditional boys' toys around our house. And we noticed that Allie played with those toys in a very different way than her brother. My son had a set of these like really creepy zombie guys. And I remember he would take them and sort of, hit each other, hit them together and grunt and growl. And Allie would play with them and play tea parties and shopping. Each of the kids had identical superhero capes with their initials sewn onto them. And Ethan would wear his around his neck like a traditional superhero. And Allie would wear hers around her head like hair or around her waist to make a skirt. And so we were out shopping one day in Target and she was probably about 4 years old. We passed like the pajama section and she saw a pair of girls' pajamas and she asked if she could get them. And so we did. And those ended up being the only pair she would wear. So I bought more. And one day after preschool, she asked to take a nap. Which was weird because she hadn't napped in like 2 years. And when we got home and we went to get ready for the nap, she wanted to put on her pajamas before she crawled into bed. So she puts on her pajamas, she crawls into bed. I close the door and immediately I hear the light flip back on and I can hear her running around. And so I open the door and I'm like, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm not really tired anymore. And I said, okay, well, get your clothes on and come downstairs. And she's like, no, I'm just gonna keep my pajamas on. And that for me was sort of a watershed moment. I knew there was something more going on. And so I asked her, did you just put your pajamas on, or did you just say you wanted to take a nap so that you could put your girls' pajamas on? And she said yes. And so I asked her if she wanted to go to the store and get some regular clothes that she could wear during the day. And she was like, we can do that. Can we go right now? And so we went to the store and bought her a whole wardrobe of girls' clothes that she would change into every day after school. And then eventually she would ask if I could bring her girls' clothes with me when I picked her up from school at the end of the day, and she would change in the car before we even left the school parking lot. My kids go to a private school, and we were able to partner with them on making Ally's school a supportive environment. It wasn't always pretty, it wasn't always easy, but we kept talking and talking and talking with them, and eventually they got it. And at first, Ally was asked to use the nurse's bathroom, which worked until it didn't. She would come home from school and say, I'm not sick. Why do I have to use the sick kid's bathroom? And she was right. And so then they allowed her to use the women's faculty restroom. That didn't work. Ally just stopped using the bathroom altogether. And finally, we helped them understand the importance of using the correct restroom. And of course, all of this is happening during the national conversation over bathroom bills. And we barely made it through this last administration. And now we're facing the threat of these so-called Save Girls sports bills. And Ally plays lacrosse and is a cheerleader. And while she goes to a private school, this bill will still affect her when her school plays against public schools. These bills that are supposedly trying to even the playing field, so to speak, are actually keeping kids off the playing field, kids like Ally. And so I think that, we've got legislation that is drafted and introduced by people who don't know trans people, who don't care to get to know them, and haven't been witness to the kind of support that our immediate community has offered to my daughter. These legislators and hate groups have written a narrative that doesn't exist. And it's truly frightening. And so the only thing I know to do is to protect my daughter from as much of this as possible and keep fighting against these bills.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your experiences. I'm just a little touched and speechless. We really look forward to having you back for the Q&A at the end of the panel. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panel and moderators. Joe Woolley will be moderating our panel today and serves as the CEO of the Nashville LGBT Chamber of Commerce. ADL was proud to be a signatory of the Tennessee Business Against Discrimination under Joe and the Chamber's leadership. Additionally, we are pleased to be joined by an incredible group of panelists today. Greg Green is the co-founder of the Transgender Awareness Alliance based out of South Carolina. Chanel Haley is the Gender Policy Manager for Georgia Equality. And Drew Mindell is a rising senior at Emory University and the Sex Ed Queries Coordinator for SOJOURN, the Southern Jewish Resource Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity. Thank you all for being here today. Joe, over to you.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thank you, ADL, for having this very important conversation, and thank you all for joining us. It's an important conversation that we've really needed to have. My name is Joe Woolley, my pronouns are he, him. I'm a cisgender gay man, and I have been talking about trans issues for the last 6 months, and what I have led with is we need to amplify and hear from transgender individuals and hear those trans voices. So I am so honored and so happy to be on this panel with you all to bring that perspective, those voices, and talk about this critical issue that the LGBT community is facing right now, which is a full-on assault on transgender rights. Everybody on this webinar wants to learn more about being a transgender ally. They're wanting to know more about transgender and gender identity issues. So what does it mean to be an ally to the trans community? I think we've all been learning how to be allies in different ways over the last year, but what does it mean to be a good trans ally? Greg, let's start with you.
One of the important things about being a trans ally is understanding that that title should come from the community. I believe that the idea of self-proclaimed allyship can be a bit dangerous. Folks often have good intentions in mind when they're wanting to help and they're wanting to spread good information and share things, but then that can change the focus of the who. That person can then be the main focus instead of the transgender community being the focus, and then that kind of can change the message. So I think that's one major important thing about allyship is understanding that there are those of us out there doing the work. Support the work that we're doing, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel and start the work on your own.
Chanel, would you like to follow up on that? Good allyship?
Sure. I think that being a good ally means that you're also educated on the community that you are supposed to be allied to. Just saying that, oh, I support that, I'm cool, or a lot of times what we usually get is I have a gay cousin or a gay friend or whatever. It's like, well, that's not really helping me. I cannot relate. And understanding what it really means to be a trans person, what it means, the adversities that come along with that, and understanding that what your privilege that you have has a lot of you, and where you can step in to help out.
Drew, I'd love to know what you think a good ally means, but then I'd like to also expand this question to how trans allyship is different. Chanel hit on it a little bit. It's different than being an ally to the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual community.
Absolutely. I think that one really important facet of allyship is being able to put aside your own discomfort for the sake of the community that you're helping. Learning how to be, whether it's a trans ally, an ally to people of color, an ally to Jewish people, to disabled people, the amount of social causes we've seen propagated over the last year, there's a really strong instinct to be defensive. There is an instinct to wait to act until you're sure that you understand everything, because you're afraid of missing things in the nuance of your own understanding. And that's not to say that you should go in headfirst without educating yourself. The education is absolutely important, but more so meaning when a trans person asks you to call them by a specific set of pronouns or allow them to use a specific restroom, you don't need to wait until you understand exactly what it is to be trans to just do the thing that they're asking of you. You don't need to wait until you completely understand how to deconstruct the gender binary to call a non-binary person they, them. And you don't need to necessarily be comfortable doing those things in order to do them. This isn't necessarily about the comfort of cis people. It is about the safety and lives of trans people. And in order to really make sure that we are helping people survive, we have to set aside our own discomfort and come from a place of just wanting to help. Yeah, and in terms of being a trans ally in specific, I mean, it really, I think, has to come from taking someone at their word. It is a lot, gender is complicated and confusing, and we don't, we can, or at least we think that we can see someone's biological sex, like we think that we can see someone's race or someone's ability, or depending on what you wear, someone's religion. But gender is a lot more complicated than we give it credit for in terms of just what we can perceive and what we believe based on that. And I think that being a trans ally has a lot to do with just trying to understand when people tell you who they are, when people tell you what they need, even though you might not understand it. You have to get an effort and you have to do what people are asking of you, because when it comes down to it, we're trying to be compassionate human beings. And I'm going to step away for 1 second to plug my computer in.
So education, you all have said, educate yourself. That's the first step to being understanding any issue and being a better ally on any topic. So you start to educate yourself. I have found that people are very uncomfortable talking about this because there is such a lack of knowledge and they really don't know where to even start that conversation. I think people are afraid to say something wrong. Any advice for allies or the transgender community in helping create an ally, helping to bring someone along to be a better ally when they say something wrong, when they may misgender or say the wrong pronoun? Advice on how to bring allies along, or advice on how to educate. Chanel, I'm sure you do this, you talk about this quite a bit in your line of work.
I do. But Julie, what I'm saying, actually, Drew and I were saying separate things. And I am a firm believer in meeting people where they are. I cannot force a person to like me, accept, understand. That's just not something that is you can't force it. And you have a right to choose who you let into your life and not based upon where they are with that. So my approach always is meeting people where they are. I will, if I want to foster this, do the education. And then to me, they become an ally if they care enough to want to then learn and proceed. That is where I am with that. And that is what I always ask people to do. And so even now, if we see things in the chat box or in society today, people are asking questions or watching the news and saying, I don't understand this and I don't like that, I'm against that. I think that we all forget is that at our core basic education of anatomy is the same. And it's our higher education understanding that takes us to this panel that we have here today. And I'd like people to call upon that core. So when you're hearing these things, when people are saying stuff that is derogatory, to go there first so that we then can try to elevate them to be up to what we understand and who we are. And again, there should be a cutoff point. I certainly have a cutoff point of like, you are ignorant and you have disrespected me in my community, and I am not going further here at all. But also, I need to understand that the same way what we do within our own families, in our nucleus family, in our friends, when we are coming out or transitioning, we have a conversation with them about that. So I don't think that we should automatically just assume the world is like, oh, you're trans, I get it, and it's easy. And so I think that's the first thing, number one. The second thing is that then once they understand that, is how they respond to what I said earlier. How then are they relating to what I'm saying my experience is, how I identify, pronouns, names, transition, body appearance within in society. And for me, most importantly is that I'm an everyday person. I don't expect special treatment because I'm transgender. That's not what I'm asking for. That to me is microaggression. If you're giving me different treatment, and that's discriminatory to me. I don't want special treatment. What Jen was talking about with her daughter, that her daughter just wanted to be treated like every other girl in school. Not a special bathroom. That's discrimination. That is what, my community, as far as being Black, understood as separate but equal. That's segregation. That is not okay. And so that's what's understanding to me when a person is with allies, understanding all of that comes along with it. And so like Drew was saying, no, you don't have to be a fan or understand completely. However, I think that education about the community is important in the sense of knowing that there's certain things that you can say or do, or certain situations that I would be in, that we'd be in together, of where I will depend and rely and expect you as my ally to step in because your power is a little more better than mine.
Greg, what are some common microaggressions or misunderstandings that the transgender community or the gender non-conforming community, people in those communities experience, and how can you avoid those behaviors and educate others on how to avoid them?
So I think it's really important that folks understand microaggressions affect everyone differently, right? So something that may be offensive to me may not be offensive to you. That's life. We're all in that. That's the same for anyone. That's not a transgender issue. So there are some trans men that if you say, "Oh, you're so beautiful," it can be seen offensive because there's femininity possibly attached to that for that person. Whereas for me, I've gotten to a place where whether someone says I'm beautiful or handsome, I accept the compliment. So a microaggression, again, it varies with the person. But there are certain things, again, that has been stated, not using the correct pronouns. If I've told you my name is Greg, please trust me that I know my name. And so when I tell you it's Greg, that's what it is. Asking, well, what was your name? Or, those type of things are very much so microaggressions. Folks who have the privilege of seeing any previous pictures of me who say, "Oh, I can see it." That's a microaggression. "Oh, you don't look like you used to be a woman. You look great for a man. You're beautiful for a trans woman." These are microaggressions that are there. It's petty and it's uncalled for. So a lot of times what well-intended people may possibly try to give what they feel are positive affirmations, then they don't always come across that way. And so it really is a fine line, and it's about understanding the person that you're speaking to, possibly even, what you feel complimenting. So I think that's very important when you're talking about microaggressions. And again, when someone tells you their name, trust their name. When someone tells you their pronouns, trust it. And if the next time you meet them, they've changed their pronouns, trust that what they're telling you in that moment are the pronouns and the name that they choose to use. Because not everyone is able, or not everyone wants to stick with one set of pronouns or one name. Folks change their names some several times, and that's okay. That doesn't make them any more or less trans. It just allows them the freedom to express themselves how they are. And so when it comes to that allyship, when it comes to understanding, even if you don't understand, it's ultimately about respecting a human as a human.
Yeah.
Joining there, Greg, what you said is the reason why I'm against and hate Throwback Thursdays. I think it's so disrespectful.
I would also add, in terms of microaggressions, demanding more personal information out of a trans person than you would a cis person that you've known for the same amount of time absolutely is up there. The amount of just strange medical questions I've been asked is absolutely astounding. Even, before I was an adult, and there were people asking a 17-year-old about surgery that he'd had on his genitals. So, if we've been talking for 10 minutes and you happen to find out that I'm trans, you don't need to ask me if my parents accepted me. You don't need to ask me what my transition was like. And you certainly don't need to ask me anything about the medical things that I've done to my body, because you wouldn't ask your cis friends for the details of their gallbladder surgery if you'd met them 10 minutes ago. You don't need to ask me.
That is very true. And I think, yes, that people cross lines very easily when it comes to discussing this. But I think people are under such a lack of knowledge. There is so much uneducation out there around gender identity and gender issues and the transgender community, and uneducation and misinformation. Let's jump into the heart of what we're here today really to talk about, which is the onslaught of attacks of the trans community, especially in the South, especially in Republican-controlled legislatures. In Tennessee, unfortunately, we are the state that has passed the most anti-LGBT legislation this year. We are the state that has the highest record of anti-LGBT legislation being proposed since 2015, with over 75 bills being introduced in this state. This year, we are the first state to pass a anti-transgender bathroom bill since North Carolina infamously passed theirs in 2016, with a $3.75 billion economic hit to the state after they did so. We didn't just pass one, we passed two. This year was unlike anything else I have ever seen, where they were targeting our transgender siblings at a rate that just we've never seen before. 27 states across the country had the anti-trans athlete bill put forth in their legislature. It is an all-out attack on the trans community. And I feel like it is so coordinated where no longer is it LGBT discrimination. They're not talking about LGBT discrimination anymore. They're calling it trans bills. They're targeting the trans community. And I think that goes to the polling and that shows the acceptance of gays and lesbians in this country, with Republicans at 64% now. The recent polls show that. And then you ask about transgender issues, and those polls rapidly drop on acceptance, but also understanding and education on those topics. So they politically got smart and said, all right, let's just focus on the trans community. Let's just attack the trans community and let's call it that. And they made it a political issue this year. Before it was discrimination, and we could say discrimination is wrong, discrimination is bad for business. And they mixed up girls' sports within this conversation. These same legislators have never been concerned about girls' sports until now, but it's a way to divide and muddy the water even more. But the goal is to target the trans community and to raise funds and appeal to a base of supporters that you're going after this community. Shocking to me that the gay and lesbian community has not understood or has not stood by the trans community in the levels that we have. We need to address that. The number of calls that I have talked to gays and lesbians allies about the nuances of these bills and pointing out that it's clearly discriminatory, and that this work has always been about trans rights and protecting trans people. Going back to the bathroom bill, that was an attack on trans issues. It's just historic. We've talked, I've given you the outline, but what I really want to hear is what's it like with these bills being proposed? What's it like living in the South, where you guys are at, doing the work that you're doing and being trans? What does it feel like? So now let's start with you.
Yeah, a lot there to unpack. I think that I want to start with you, what you said, Joe, when you were talking about saying that because the bills are trans-specific, that means that the nation, or Republicans, so to speak, conservatives, those that have put the bills forward, are more accepting of the gay community. And I don't think that's true. I think what it is that they recognize that the gay community are not allies of the trans community. So that's number one. I think people need to really understand that. That is my biggest argument I have with people, especially friends, family members that don't know that there's a difference between the two. The second thing is that because we don't have those allies, then it's a larger target, and they consider it us low-hanging fruit. And it has been proven to be so, as Tennessee has very clearly clarified there, right? I mean, Tennessee has seen that legislation do cripple a state, and yet let's do it again here and do it times two, right? So clearly they think that, oh, that was just a fad, a phase, and it's over with. So there's that. Yes, you are right also that it is a coordinated effort across the country with lobbyists that have targeted one group to try to build up their base. There's that. Also, it's something that's difficult to explain. So where there could be another issue, we can go on CNN and talk about it, and people are like, oh, okay, I get it now. That's not necessarily the case when it comes to trans people, because our community is so diverse. What I need people to understand when it comes to a trans person, there's a trans person that is part of every single community. There's a trans person that is of every race, of every age group, of every city, and every state, every religion, every political party. So there is not a way of just saying, hey, let's help all these liberals who are trans people. That's not how that works. It is, we are part of every group. So that's an issue that we have too when trying to explain and talk about and advocate in a setting. And then, what it feels like here is that there is such a targeted effort. I would say that in Georgia, we're pretty good. Myself at Georgia Equality, of communicating with our base, with the state around the issues. And Georgia is very strong around economics. So if it's going to hurt our economy, then Georgia's like, we ain't messing with that for the most part. But the pressure has been on. We've had, the 2 bill, we've had several bills, but both medical ban as well as trans kids in sports have both been up on the debate several times now in our General Assembly. And it will be back again when we come back in January. So we know that. And so we will fight again around that. And what it feels like as a trans person, as a person that works in this, as a person that actually just last week left from my birth city of San Diego, California, and recognizing and seeing the difference between California and what is allotted there, even in a conservative city like San Diego, of a liberal state, to here with my very traditional father side of the family, okay, who is like, child, you're what? It is very different and confusing and frustrating, depressing. And I'll tell you overall, as someone in my 40s, it's just, I'm tired of having to explain and battle just being who I am. And then, in my job, of course, doing it for other people too in my community, it becomes a lot. The fact that I'm not a person who plays sports, so I can't relate to the sports situation. Like, I can't relate to why any kid wants to play sports. I can relate to sports, exactly. And so that's why I'm like, well, they want to play sports, what's the big deal? To me, it was the same thing with the military. Like, I would never join the military, but they want to defend this country when I don't want to. Let them. What is wrong with you? It's just, I don't understand of how someone could be so evil about that. Then I want to add one more thing to this about doing advocacy work over this years, since in my 6 years of being in Georgia Equality. And I remember going back into the bathroom legislation that was around, started in 2015, there was a lot of it, right? Yeah. And I always said there was a big problem with the way national organizations took this on. Because the argument from the right was, we don't want men in the bathroom with our girls and wives, okay? We know that was a direct assault on trans women. You should have put trans men in the forefront to show that the legislation that you want is giving you exactly what you're saying you do not want. But this is part of our community that is actually ignored and not seeing when we talk about trans men, because this is strictly about trans women. So even now when people are talking about the sports situation and saying, well, it's not fair that, these men are competing against women. Well, there's also these, what you would call women competing against men. So I don't understand how it is always this one-sided issue that you're arguing.
Yeah. Greg, take that on.
All right, listen, what you just said is perfect. Here in South Carolina, when that bathroom bill came up, that's actually one of, when I went to speak, that's one of the things I said, the senator who brought that bathroom bill up. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, so what you're telling me is you want me in the bathroom with your wife? And I said it that way on purpose. One, it made him so very uncomfortable. And two, I don't like that the continued use for that argument is the children. Children are very innocent. Children go in the bathroom to use the bathroom. It's the adults whose adult perversions change their mind about what's supposed to be happening in the bathroom. Kids understand the bathroom is for using and you get out. So what you said on that is so important. There are trans men who are playing sports who are not allowed to play sports on the men's team, and they are dominating, but it's not being talked about because again, we are the invisible man. we are all so often looked over, and the battle or the attack is so focused on our trans sisters that over half of the point is even being missed. When you talk about how do all these bills, how does it affect us? Again, now that I'm older, I'm just tired. It's just such a heavy burden. I have made the decision to be an activist and to speak on these topics and to educate people, because people fear what they don't know. And that fear is easily translated into hate when it's not checked. And so I try to educate folks, but all trans folks don't go into advocacy and shouldn't have to. And so the kids shouldn't have to be their own advocates. That's why I still do it. Yes, it's tiring. Yes, it's overwhelming. Yes, it hurts and it's painful when I see folks getting attacked, when I see murders, and I see folks that that hate crimes have happened, but states won't pass hate crime laws. You know, that's so overwhelming. But I have to try to stay positive for the folks who are coming after me. And not coming after me as an attack, but the young trans folks who are following in my steps, so that they don't really have to be advocates, so that they can just live life, so that they can just be themselves, live life, and not worry about it. And like you, I am not a sports person. I could care less if you want to play ball. I was on the band, so the band is halftime is game time. I went to military college, you know, and I chose not to go into the military at that time because of don't ask, don't tell. Fast forward, I thought I wanted to go in, I still couldn't. And it's just like, you know what, the military is just not for me. So that's that, you know. But it's so heavy. It's such a heavy burden to ask our children to carry when we have all these laws and we try to tell them, it's okay, be yourself. And then someone's murdered. It's okay, be yourself. Then there's a law passed saying you don't really exist. It's okay, be yourself. Is it? It is, because we want it to be. But we have to be realistic enough to understand how heavy that burden is for someone so young who can't find that little glimmer, that little piece of hope.
That is an excellent point we're going to wrap up on. We could have talked for another hour. We didn't have enough time to hear from you guys. I'm getting the wrap up to move to Q&A, and I know we've got some good ones lined up.
Would it be possible for me to make one point about?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Drew.
Conclude. I just have to say, as someone who is young and someone who, you know, was in high school pretty recently and is seeing my friends, several trans friends, dealing with discrimination, trying to get onto sports teams, I encourage anybody who is trying to make an argument from biology to go and look up Michael Phelps and the amount of physical conditions that his body has that make him a better swimmer, his height, his lung capacity, all kinds of things. When we're playing sports in high school, some kids have started going through puberty and some haven't. We have them all play on the same team. Some kids are always some kids hit 5 foot and stop growing. Some kids shoot up to 6'5", and they all get to try out for the same basketball team. It is so disingenuous to me to see people bring up biological difference in sports in terms of fairness when that has never been an issue before. I was the short, chubby kid who couldn't breathe well, trying to run the pacer test with everybody else. I know what it's like to not be able to perform as the same as everybody else, but still being held to the same standard. This is not what's happening. This is actively trying to keep trans people out of public life. It's the same thing with bathrooms. If someone can't go to the bathroom in a building, you are trying to limit the amount of time that they are able to spend in public. You are trying to keep them out of public life. And so I just want to make sure that we are very clear that these bills, it's never been about biology. It has always been about discrimination.
Let's say it again. It's always been about discrimination. So, excellent way to wrap that up. Allison, we're going to bring you back in and start the Q&As. To the panelists, thank you all so much for talking with me today, and I wish we would have had more time, but thank you for all that you do, and thank you for speaking out.
Wow, thank you, Joe, for your leadership and for leading this powerful conversation. I think we've all kind of laughed and cried and just feeling really enlightened right now. We've received a lot of really great questions in the chat, so let's get started. Let's start with this. We obviously still have a lot of work to do to lift up and achieve equity for transgender people. What are your hopes for the future of the transgender community, and how can allies help you achieve that? Greg, you want to start?
Absolutely. I mean, the future would be beautiful if these conversations weren't needed. The reality of how culture works is it will take several generations before that possibly, if that's a thing. So how can allies help? Definitely respecting people and being okay with not knowing everything, not understanding everything, but respecting the information you do have, respecting what you do know, and just respecting people. Because ultimately, that is what's going to change the world, regardless of who identifies in what way, regardless of religion, gender identity, sexual orientation. It's about respect. And if we can do that, then we can make this journey easier for the next person.
That's great. Does anybody else want to add?
My biggest hope is that it stops being the kind of scary thing that it is. My biggest hope is that, you know, when I was 15 years old, I packed up a backpack and hid it under my dresser. And it had all of my spare money that I could save. Any cash that I had that I didn't absolutely need went into that backpack. It had a change of clothes, it had a chest binder, it had my learner's permit when I didn't need it, because well, first of all, was a very neurotic kid, but I was ready at a moment's notice to be fed up, to be too tired, to tell my parents about who I was and have to leave immediately. And I wanted to have a bag ready. I was very lucky that that was not the reaction that I received when I came out. It still wasn't great, and it was still difficult. And no one who is 15 or 8 or 25 or 80 should ever have to feel like that when it comes to the people in their lives that they love, and when it comes to just wanting to be perceived for who you are. My biggest wish is that someone could go to their parents or their teachers or their friends and say, I want you to call me by this name and these pronouns, and for that to be the end of the conversation, and for people to get excited about practicing people's new name and pronouns. I've done that with my friends when friends of mine have come out. Those of us who, you know, aren't that person will get together and just talk about them in the third person so that we know that we won't mess up in front of them, because we love them and care about them. And I would love to see that be something that people participate in. I want trans people to feel loved, and I want trans people to feel unafraid, and I want those things to be true and not just feelings.
It's really beautiful, Drew. Thanks. I'm looking at Jen, and I know she's like beaming, thinking of her daughter too.
Damn. You know, I would love for parents like me to not have to do this kind of work. I would love, you know, for the work to all be done. You know, when Drew was talking about his backpack, you know, sort of, I was thinking about when Allie was in the middle of her transition, we had a safe folder. We still have it, with letters from her physician, letters from her therapist, name change information, all of this stuff, so that we could, you know, if God forbid, you know, someone, you know, called Child Protective Services on us. You know, I'm in the public eye more than I think my daughter cares for me to be, but that was a concern of ours. So yeah, this idea of having trans folks be safe and accepted and respected in the world is all the reason why I do this work.
Great, thanks. So there's another really good question here. How can we, in small rural communities in which our students are more isolated and our population more conservative and traditional, provide support and resources for our LGBTQ+ youth who may not receive acceptance at home? Who wants to start here? Chanel?
I do, yes. So the fact that they are on this part of this webinar and that they're asked that question means that the first step has already been made. So now we need to broadcast that you are a safe space. So whether that is putting a signage up in your classroom, or in your school, your church, maybe it's a local, a neighbor in the neighborhood. But this is actually something that's common. That it is common. People who don't need the safe space do not know about it, but to make it very aware that this one location is where you can come. We need something. And then to add to that, we have actually up here in Atlanta at Scott College, once a year, the Safe Schools Coalition has a conference, and that takes place around in February. And that is where all the Safe Schools Coalition is free, 100% free, can come up and spend a day, it's a Saturday, where you get to engage with other people from around the state who is from rural Georgia also, who's never engaged with another LGBTQ person. There's a talent show, there's workshops, it's again free food, it's a full day for that. So that's what I would say, is that if this is something that you're interested in doing and you are really interested in learning and knowing about that, it could be everywhere. Talk to your local doctor's office, your local church, any business, anywhere. Just think about who it is that maybe has a like mind as yourself, and you can put that up as a safe space so that these LGBTQ youth know that they can go there if they have questions or concerns or needs any support.
Great.
Oh,
go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and just share that studies have shown that it just takes one supportive adult in a child's life, an LGBTQ child, to really alter their trajectory. And so it's important to not minimize the support of even just one adult.
Talk to us a little bit about the intersectionality of identities in the transgender community. How do your intersecting identities impact interactions in your daily life and work?
I'll definitely jump on that. That's one thing that was really interesting for me when I spoke to my father about my transition. And, he's like, I know there are certain things that women deal with in life. There are certain things that Black women deal with in life. He said, but it's a whole nother ballgame as a Black man. And so, as the world has shown us recently, not years ago, but recently, it is. And I actually am a former police officer, so I wore a badge for 5 years. And it doesn't make a difference now. I still get nervous. I get scared, what's going to happen if I get stopped. So those are sometimes that I have to be aware of my identity in that moment. And it was mentioned earlier about choosing who you share your information with, right? In a moment, if I were to get stopped, I'm not going to share anything about my transness. I'm only going to deal with this stop to the best of my ability. But I am lucky, I am privileged that all of my documents are changed. So if my documents aren't all changed, that stop is going to be totally different. So understanding intersectionality is very important, because you have to know which part of you is being attacked at the moment, because that helps you to respond to said attack. So it's just as understanding others' intersectionalities is important, but it's very important as a person to understand. There are times when my father hat is more important because it's my son that I need to look after. There are times that my husband hat is more important because I need to make sure my wife is good. So those are intersections that everyone has. No one wears one hat. No one. And I don't care who you are in the world. No one wears one hat. And so understanding which hat is the dominant hat to wear for that moment to be successful, for that moment to be safe, for that moment to end well, whatever that moment is to me important internally more so than externally. That's
really insightful, Greg. We have time for one last question. So, which it's hard to pick. We've had a lot of questions about misgendering, kind of accidental misgendering. So for someone who wants to be an ally, what should they do if someone is misgendered in a public space and the target does not respond?
Speak up. Absolutely, 100%. I would think that, I'm trying to be specific. When you are trans, especially early in your transition and throughout your life, as people find out that you're trans and decide that they don't want to respect you because of that, you experience misgendering an incredible amount. You experience it pretty much daily for a long time. And depending on whether or not people perceive you a certain way, it may get less frequent, it may not. Someone who is cis may hear a trans person get misgendered once in a day in that one conversation. It is going to be infinitely less exhausting for that one cis person to speak up on behalf of that trans person than for that trans person to have to continually advocate for themselves throughout the day over and over and over. This is assuming that you know this person and are aware of their pronouns and know that something is being misconstrued. What you will be doing is providing yourself as a quote unquote reputable source for another cis person to hear it from. When, for example, when women speak up about sexism, it's often really hard for them to be taken seriously. But when men speak up about sexism, other men are a lot more likely to listen to them. If a trans person speaks up and tries to prevent themselves from getting misgendered, cis people, specifically transphobic cis people, are going to want to brush that off because, well, this person's just saying their one thing. If other people establish in the room, this is our understanding of this person, this is the truth of this person, here is how you need to refer to them for us to continue to have a respectful conversation, you are setting a standard. You are setting a standard for how people are going to be treated in this room. Yeah, that is my 2 cents on it.
I just wanted to add to what Drew said is that when a person makes the mistake of misgendering, it is absolutely okay to acknowledge you made a mistake and move on. Harping on the situation makes it awkward, and I'm over it. So it's very awkward, it's embarrassing. Now more people have heard it, the mistake. So just, oh, I'm sorry, or just then start using the correct pronoun and let's keep it moving, okay? I don't want to be the center of attention here.
I love it.
My favorite script that I've heard for misgendering is somebody misgenders someone speaks up and says, actually, this person uses this pronoun. If you just made that mistake, you say, thank you. Correct pronoun, continue your sentence. You don't need to apologize and put yourself in a position for absolution because that is putting the pressure on the trans person to forgive you for making a microaggression. You acknowledge that you messed up, you continue correctly.
It's really helpful. I love it, like simplicity, and now in all of our heads, Chanel is over it, move on, like we can keep going. I love it. This is very helpful. I am so sad that we are out of time. And so this is going to conclude our Q&A for today. And I really want to thank Joe and Jen and Greg, Chanel and Drew for being with us and providing such excellent insights. And of course, thanks to all of you for taking the time to be with us today. There is so much more to discuss on the topic. So we hope you will join us for ADL's 22nd annual Supreme Court review on Thursday, July 8th from 12 to 1:30, where we will hear from leading legal scholars as they discuss the most important cases of the term, including Fulton versus Philadelphia, an LGBTQ+ rights case about discrimination in foster parent certification. The link to sign up is in the chat. More information and registration for next month's Fighting Hate from Home will be coming to your inbox soon, and we hope you will join us again. Until then, stay safe and continue to be well. Thanks, everyone.